In the last section, we spoke about how we cannot fetch all of our requests in one single function call. So instead, inside of our request index component, I'm going to find my getInitialProps function. And inside of here, we're going to first get our total number of requests from our campaign, and then we're going to attempt to fetch each of them one by one. Again, not super ideal, not the best approach in the world, but it's essentially what we have to do for right now. So with that in mind, let's first get started by getting a hold of our campaign contract inside this getInitialProps function. Once we do, we'll get our total number of requests, and then we'll work from there. So the first thing I think we need to do is import in our campaign contract, or the campaign function in this case, from our Ethereum campaign.js file. So up at the top, I will import campaign from up three directories, Ethereum campaign, like so. Then inside of our getInitialProps function, we'll get a handle on our campaign instance by creating a new variable called campaign, calling the campaign function, and we'll pass our address into that, like so. Next, we can use this instance right here to get the total number of requests that have been created. As we just saw a moment ago inside of Remix, we have that getRequestCount function that we can make use of. So we're going to issue a call to getRequestCount. So back over here, we'll say const request count is await campaign.methods.get request. And let me check the get request. So notice how over here we put an S on this, get requests count. So let's make sure that we stay consistent over here. So get requests count.call, like so. All right, so now here comes a little bit more of the fun logic. So I'd said that we can essentially, for however many times, for request count right here, we can somehow iterate or loop through and fetch every individual request. Now, rather than looping through per se and making these requests or these calls over to our campaign instance one by one, we're going to issue all the calls in one go, and then we'll wait for them all to be resolved by using the promise.all helper. Now, to do this is going to require a little bit of fancy JavaScript here. All right, so we're going to use a little fancy JavaScript. As usual, we're going to write out our code, and then we'll talk about exactly what it does. So I'm going to say const requests equals await promise.all. And then inside of a set of parentheses here, we're going to say array request count dot fill dot map. And we're going to place an arrow function inside this map. So I'm going to say element and index, and then I'm going to open up the arrow function like so, and we'll say return campaign.methods.requests index.call, like so. All right, so we'll talk about exactly what this whole block of code right here does in just a second, but before we do, let's attempt to console log out this request thing. I just want to console log it and see what happens. All right, so I'm going to console log requests. I'm going to save the file, and we'll go back over to the browser, and we're going to refresh the page. All right, so back over here, I'll refresh the page. Now, it might take a second. Yeah, there we go. Now, remember, anytime that we do a console log at our getInitialProps function and then refresh the entire page, the initial console log is not going to appear inside of our browser or console. Instead, it's going to appear in our terminal window where we are running our server. So I'm going to flip back over to my server. Here it is right here. And if I zoom out, I should see a console log of all the different requests that I've created tied to this particular campaign. So in this case, I see one request right here because at this point, I've created simply one request. My request says buy battery casings. Here's the amount of money that I'm asking for. I've got the recipient, whether or not it has been finalized, and the number of approvals as well. Now this definitely looks like a struct right here, and we've definitely worked with structs before. So not only do we get this kind of array accessor into the request, but we also have the different field properties labeled on here as well. So it definitely looks like I'm getting back a list of requests here, but that doesn't really answer what's going on with the code that you and I just wrote. So let's flip back over and kind of take this apart. I think that the challenging part here to understand is the array with request count dot fill right here. So the thing to keep in mind is that our request method right here will retrieve a given individual request. So like a request at index of 0 or index of 1 or index of 2. Because remember, we are using an array to store all these different requests. So index right here, what we really want is to iterate from 0 all the way up to request count. That's how we kind of want to iterate through this thing. Now to do that, I use this array.fill thing right here. And that's just a little bit of a trick. So let's flip over to our terminal and I'll show you exactly what that array fill does. So let's imagine that we have one request right now, maybe just like one request total. So I could say array, I could pass in that one request total and then dot fill like so. So that returns to me an array with one empty element inside of it, or one empty index. So I then did the dot map, and by doing dot map with element and index, I could essentially get back an index that counted, or an array that counted from 0 up to our request count. So let's say that we had instead a request count of 5. So if I put that in, it just gives me back an array of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So the entire purpose of that array.fill was to just give me a list of all the different indices that I need to request from the campaign. That's all. It's just a bit of clever JavaScript. All right, so that's definitely working the way I expect. So the last thing I want to do is to clean up this console log right here. So I'm going to delete the console log, and I'm going to make sure that I pass in that list of requests, or not pass in, but add it to this object that gets returned from getInitialProps right here. So now we can start to work with this list of requests inside of our component. Now the very last thing I want to do as well is make sure that I pass through the request count variable, because I might eventually want to print out the number of requests on my screen as well. So I'm going to make sure I pass in request count too. Okay, I think this looks good. Let's take a pause right here. We'll come back in the next video and we're going to start making use of this list of requests inside of our component. So quick break and I'll see you in just a minute.